Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining me today because, well, we are tackling what is literally one of humanity's oldest and, let's be honest, most difficult philosophical puzzles. We're talking about the problem of evil. For centuries, thinkers all over the globe have wrestled with this fundamental question about the nature of our universe, the reality of suffering, and what it all actually means for the idea of a cosmic designer. Today, we're going to dig into the source material and map out exactly how different traditions try to solve, or in some cases, completely bypass this massive dilemma. So, let's just dive right in.
Right out of the gate, our sources confront us with this giant central paradox. If we look at traditional arguments, especially the design argument, which suggests the universe was crafted by a supreme being, we immediately hit a brick wall. Because the existence of evil implies that the design of the cosmos, and therefore the designer, is flawed. It's a direct, unavoidable challenge. I mean, how can anyone assert the existence of a perfectly caring, benevolent God when there is just so much undeniable evil in the world? It's a massive point of friction, one that's literally kept philosophers awake for thousands of years. To navigate all of this, we're following a clear roadmap today. First, we'll look at the ultimate paradox. Second, the logic of suffering. Third, we'll explore Augustine's counterintuitive defense. And finally, we'll wrap up with the Yoruba paradigm shift. All right, starting off with section 1, the ultimate philosophical paradox. Now, what's really fascinating here is how we even define the problem itself. Our source material points out that there's this, kind of glib answer that gets thrown around a lot, just blaming human moral agents for all the evil in the world. Basically saying, hey, it's not God's fault, it's our fault. But a lot of philosophers reject that easy out. Instead, they reframe the entire dilemma from the problem of evil to the problem of suffering. And why do that? Because it puts the spotlight directly on the undeniable reality of suffering itself, rather than just getting bogged down in debates about human moral agency. It forces us to take a really hard look at the raw state of the world as it actually is.
Which brings us to section 2, the logic of suffering.
This brings us to what's known as the logical problem of evil. Enter David Hume, the famous 18th century Scottish skeptic. Hume attacked the foundational ideas of a creator by setting up this inescapable three-step logical trap. Let's walk through it. Step 1. If God knows about the suffering and wants to stop it, but physically cannot, well then God isn't omnipotent, not all-powerful. Step 2, if God can stop it and would want to, but just doesn't know about it, then God isn't omniscient, not all-knowing. And step 3, if God knows about it, has the power to stop it, but simply doesn't want to ease the pain, then God is not omnibenevolent, not all-good. Hume argues that this triad basically proves the mere existence of evil means you can't logically justify belief in a caring creator. It is a brutal, airtight logical sequence. Building right on top of that logic, we get the evidential problem of evil, which is championed by philosopher William Rowe. He looks at probability and the sheer amount of intense, seemingly pointless suffering in the world. He basically argues that an all-powerful, all-knowing being absolutely could prevent extreme suffering without ruining some greater good, or causing something equally bad to happen. Because a completely good being would naturally stop pointless suffering if it could, Rowe concludes that an omnipotent, omniscient, wholly good being just doesn't exist. It's a heavy thought, for sure. So how does anyone respond to that? Let's look at section 3, Augustine's counterintuitive defense. To counter these skeptical arguments, traditional theism builds a defense using what the text calls a highly Neoplatonic methodology. Now, I know that sounds like a mouthful, but let's break it down using one of the earliest Christian defenses from Saint Augustine. To escape Hume's logical trap, Augustine realized he had to totally rethink the very nature of what evil actually is. He argued that since God is omnibenevolent, completely good, God would absolutely never introduce evil into existence. Therefore, Augustine concluded, evil isn't actually a thing. It's not a real, independent entity that was created. Instead, it's a privation or a negation of the good. Think of it like a shadow, right? A shadow isn't a physical object you can touch. It's literally just the absence of light. Now, claiming that evil isn't real, that it's merely an absence, is what our sources accurately label a prima facie counterintuitive result. I mean, it definitely bends the mind a bit when you first hear it, but within Augustine's framework, it actually solves the puzzle. If evil isn't a created reality, then God didn't create it. For Augustine, the presence of this absence of good doesn't disprove God at all. Actually, and here's the wild part, in a strange sort of way, it reflects the absolute necessity of God. It is a really brilliant, albeit highly abstract intellectual maneuver designed specifically to protect the concept of an all-good creator.
Now let's zoom out to a totally different perspective in section 4, the Yoruba paradigm shift. This completely rewrites the rules of the game. Our sources show how the rich diversity of African thought helps us examine agency from entirely different starting points. See, in the Western framework, the problem of evil is entirely dependent on the assumption that God is the entity that made all things. If God made literally everything, reconciling evil with a good God is a massive, glaring problem. But in the Yoruba framework, well, what if you just lift the doing of evil completely away from the supernatural creator? In this paradigm, God is removed from the creator role entirely. And if God didn't create the cosmos, the agency of evil, and that desperate need to reconcile suffering with a creator is suddenly gone. The whole paradox just vanishes into thin air.
So that begs the question, if a supreme creator isn't responsible for evil in Yoruba cosmology, who is? Well, the agency is shifted to other spiritual beings known as the Ajogun. According to the text, these beings are scattered all around the cosmos, and each one is associated with very specific types of wrongdoing. And right alongside the Ajogun, the agency of evil is also placed squarely on human moral agents, harming one another. By shifting the foundational cosmology upon which we understand goodness and evil, we get this massive philosophical pivot regarding who is actually responsible for suffering.
And this radically changes the very definition of the word evil. Because it's no longer tied to an all-powerful creator, it loses those heavy, supernatural connotations. Instead, it takes on a much more down-to-earth, tangible sense. Evil is simply defined as a destruction of life. It's an action conducted by one human moral agent that harms another. It brings the entire concept of evil right down to the ground level of human experience and daily interaction.
We've seen how Augustine tried to explain evil away as a mere absence of good to save the logic of the creator. But Yoruban metaphysics takes a totally different, incredibly powerful stance. It asserts the absolute necessity of evil. According to this view, our ability to contrast good and evil is logically required just so we can make sense of both concepts. Essentially, you can't have one without the other, which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought to ponder. Could we ever truly understand what is good without the existence of evil to contrast it against? It completely reshapes how we view suffering in our world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today, and as always, keep questioning everything.